I love going up and having the freedom of flying. We have this beautiful Z dimension of the space above us. We're independent of the roads, the bridges, the tolls, the people. There are no limitations. You just go.
From 2000 to 2004, I pitched everybody that would listen about Beta Air. And then only about 3.5 years ago, I met Martine Rothblatt. She stopped me in a presentation. She goes, "Who are you and why are you here?"
United Therapeutics is a company that I started to save the life of my youngest daughter. We develop medicines for rare and neglected diseases, and we are now working to create an unlimited supply of transplantable organs. It's important to me to deliver our organs with a zero carbon footprint. Kyle and I talked about this for 12 straight hours.
As I left, she said, "Why don't you write down how you would go about eliciting critical thinking in aviation?"
So I went home and I painted a watercolor. I wrote all over it in pen, and I sent it to her at like 4 a.m. And at 9 o'clock the next morning, I'm out working on a motorcycle in the garage. My wife comes out and she goes, "You might want to check your text." And she gives me my cell phone and it just says, "You're on." If you think you understand what the problems with electric aviation are gonna be, you're probably wrong. No paper projects ever go anywhere. Build the real thing and fly it.
Beta did countless tests, countless simulations, and Aliyah had its first flight within a year after I met Kyle.
The product vision is it picks up off the ground like a helicopter, and the rear rotor turns on and it accelerates forward almost on a runway in the sky. 30, 40 seconds later, top rotors are off and you're flying like an airplane. This aircraft takes away, I would say, the 3 most annoying things about flying. It's the fuel, the airport, and the noise. And this is the difference between making a new airplane and making a new aircraft ecosystem. When we think about the call to action for our generation in electric aviation, it's not, does it help us to get to tomorrow's flight test or help us to get to that other customer, that other revenue. It's to turn the corner on climate change. If you put your blinders on and just look at the finish line of what you thought the world was going to look like, you're probably going to fail at that. You don't have a grand plan, you have an idea and a philosophy, and that's what we've been pursuing. When you define that to a bunch of smart people and then just get the f*** out of the way, then you get good stuff.
Electric aviation is sustainable, the costs are lower, the operational flexibility is higher. It is the inevitable future. And I think if we are focused in the way that we're focused on simplicity and pragmatism here at Beta, we'll make it happen sooner than a lot of people might believe.
So our next guest really thinks out of the box. Kyle Clark's the founder of Beta Technologies, and as you've just learned, they're working to develop and establish the electric airplane. I met Kyle maybe 15 years ago, and we were at a mutual friend's house who's a retired state police. Kyle was telling me about riding his bicycle to Burlington to work at some power company. And he happened to slip in this dream, and I sort of, when driving home with my wife, I said, "This guy's nuts. I don't even want to get in a plane that, flies. We know that flies." And here he is, designing this new technology. So please, warm welcome for Kyle Clark. So Kyle, thanks for being here today. I also know you went to school in Boston, played a little hockey, but how did this passion take over your life and move you in this direction?
It's awesome to be here. I mean, it's special to be invited to this particular group of people. As some of you guys may know, my dad, he worked for nearly 50 years up here at the University of Vermont Medical Center, doing equipment calibration and keeping all the equipment rocking through technical services program at the university. And have a lot of family members that work within your networks. So thank you for both employing them and everything you all do. So it's special to be here, and I kind of wish my dad was here, although he's down in Ecuador teaching people how to use the equipment that used to be used in the United States at hospitals down there now. So he's still living the dream in retirement. So how did it start? I've always been enamored with aviation, and when I was in high school here, I was attempting to design and build airplanes, including ultralights and a variety of different types of helicopters. And a funny little story that you may have heard when I first pitched you Beta Air was I built an ultralight in high school, and my mother actually burned it because she thought I'd kill myself in it. And then I went on to just knock on every door of people that I could maybe get in the air with, and one of them was George Coy up in Highgate, Vermont. And he took me for my first flight over the airport in Swanton. And he really unlocked something, and the flight went something like this. Here's an old 50-year-old Zlin. We're going to go check it out, literally kick the tires, hop in, we take off, he pulls the canopy back and inverts the thing. And he looks at me and says, just getting out the M&Ms, and writes the airplane and takes off. And I was absolutely hooked. That's where it started.
Right. So, you really have a wonderful facility, and you may not know it, but my son was working for Treasurer Pichek this summer as an intern, and he had a chance to enter your facility and tour your research organization. He was blown away. So can you tell us a little bit more about what's actually happening inside that building and your facility?
Yeah, I think there's two really distinct but overlapping elements there. There's the facility, but the facility is only there to facilitate the people and give them a place that they want to come to work, a place where they can collaborate. In our particular case, communication and collaboration is king in research and development. And it's because things like medical instrumentation, airplanes, defense systems, they really have no sense of humor for leaving technological money on the table when we're designing something. You don't get to half get an airplane wing right, or half get the control system right, or design something that's 20% too heavy. You have to actually wring out, and it's an unforgiving discipline. So you wring out every piece of weight, maximize the structural efficiency of things, the electrical efficiency, all of those things. So it demands collaboration. So I took this interesting class at MIT. I went back for some grad school work after my undergrad, which Beta was my undergrad thesis, actually, that I did about 20 years ago now. But anyway, I went back and I took a class called The Organization of Innovation. It was taught by Professor Allen at MIT, and he put pedometers, voice recording devices, GPSs on a whole bunch of people throughout BMW, and then measured the amount of positive interaction of people, like the excitement of how I'm talking to you versus another day, another dollar, and correlated that with different metrics, like my ability to see you generates some amount of empathy. It also, because you're a human, I'm a human. Now, if your computer screen is turned away from me or towards me, it changes the amount of empathy that I have. I see you're working, I get interested in what you're doing, I talk to you about what you're doing, and those collaboration points started to be quantified by Dr. Allen. And some of the ones that I remembered very specifically were that you could be 300 feet away from somebody or 12 feet away, but if you could see them as opposed to on a lower floor, your collaboration was equivalent. So imagine going 100 feet away or 50 feet away or 20 feet away. Computer screens turned. Visual connection with the product. So when your son came to our facility, he probably noted that there is glass everywhere. And every single person in that facility can see not necessarily the person, but that person is there. And when the landing gear guy is thinking about, am I going to put the wheel guy in the corner or the structures guy in the corner, they see each other and they don't box each other in. They don't do something that hurts their design. And so what's neat about that is it creates a really interesting workspace. Like physical workspace, but it's all driven, it's all endeavoring to drive communication and collaboration. And I'll go on to how we think about that in the production facility, because I think it's a different story, but that's probably what he saw and felt.
Yeah, he was really saying, wow, you can see everything. And he was pretty blown away. You said something interesting to me. You can't build a wing half right. You can't do landing gear half right. You can't do anything you're doing half right. In our organizations and facilities, it's kind of the same way. It's a life and death situation. What are some of the, and I know my wife happens to be an operating room nurse, and they've actually taken some the Air Force's protocols and put them into the operating room for safety reasons. What are some of the things that you could share with our audience about, getting things right, and how do you work with your team to make sure everybody's rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, it's communication is number one. And so we have what we call cockpit resource management, CRM. And it's a neat story about the measurable effect of communication checklists and really breaking down that stigma that if I need a checklist to do something, that I'm somehow inferior from the guy who can do it from rote memory. So we address that straight up. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is this challenge culture. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows it's coming, so it makes it less of a shock that it's coming. And it also, and I'll put this in context in a second, it also drives people to challenge themselves and be introspective. So we go do a flight test, and I'll be flying the plane, and I'm supposed to rotate at 89 knots. And I'm distracted, and I hit 92 knots, and I pull a little hard, and I pull up. We go into brief. We brief everything, whether it's an engineering retrospective or a flight test brief. And I walk in there. I'm always given the opportunity to say, here are the 5 things I screwed up. And I do that. And it's like you're exposing yourself, you're challenging yourself, you're being introspective. And then the next step is you give everybody else an opportunity to critique what you're doing. And this challenge culture comes from really high-performing aeronautics teams and others. If you ever go to a brief of the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, that's exactly how it goes. Now, what's interesting, if you look at the history from Ernest Gahn type writing all the way to now, that actually started in the cockpit, and surgeons then started doing this and following checklists and breaking down that stigma. So the way we find we have to do it, because it still exists, is telling people that you are you can be proud and you can still expose yourself mm-hmm. to people. And we're going down a thread I didn't expect to go down, but it's an interesting one.
Right. So, healthcare, is certainly what we're here for to talk about. But one of your first backers on this film started her company to save the life of her child, who actually took interest in your product. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what your vision is for your aircrafts as you move into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So Martine Rothblatt, who founded Sirius XM Radio, her daughter was diagnosed with pulmonary hypertension. There wasn't a cure for this, and she went on a mission to find a cure. Well, it turns out the drugs that they pulled off the shelf, the orphan drugs that weren't justifiably developed by pharmaceutical companies, treated a lot of other organ ailments as well. So she started to grow her business around kind of the germ of saving her daughter. And now she is recognizing that being on drugs and compromising your lifestyle, having some immune problems with it, is a short-term solution. So she came up with this idea of actually creating an unlimited supply of organs and went about it in 7 different ways. And now they're down to about 3 different ways because some of them failed. And I had the most fascinating experience. You guys have been in operating rooms. The first time I've ever been in an operating room was last year. And I was with Martine, and she said, we just got FDA approval to do the first pig-to-human heart transplant. And we were out in Minnesota together, and she said, do you want to come to it with me? And I was like, sure, absolutely. She goes, okay, we got to cut this meeting off at noon, and we got to be in Baltimore by 1 o'clock.
How'd you get there?
We set a world speed record from Duluth to Baltimore in a Gulfstream 600 at Mach 0.95. No joke. It's actually a recognized world speed record. We landed, scrubbed up, went into the operating room, and I was standing at the feet, she was standing at the head, and they did this transplantation of the first genetically modified pig heart into a human. Now, what's interesting about that is a heart's pretty complex for genetic modification. kidneys, lungs, other things that they're repairing now. They need about twice as many transports as a normal explantation, replantation. And she didn't want to do that while polluting the environment, because helicopters and jets are amazingly polluted, especially when they're carrying an organ containment system that weighs 150 pounds or something, right? So she said, can we do this all electric and not help, is the wrong word, but you know what I mean, destroy the world while we're trying to let people breathe better? And I said, absolutely. And this was, it was alluded to in the video. This was kind of one of the genesis. This is the point at which all these ideas that I had been working on had an application, an immediate application. So then, as we got into this project, I'll tell you where Martina's made just an irreversible kind of directional impact on our business. I started developing this one aircraft, and it wasn't the right aircraft. And I said, Martina, I'm not able to keep my promise here. I can't deliver this aircraft. She goes, Kyle, your promise is to deliver something to the patients. Think about the patients. And it kind of shocked me a little bit, but contained within that answer, and that's all she said, was stop developing that aircraft and develop the right aircraft. And we changed the configuration, and sure enough, now we have set a whole bunch of our own world records with electric flight, distance records, and other such things. But that little piece of guidance was so pivotal to our business. It wasn't, are your investors going to be happy? Are you going to let the team down or whatever? But what's your ultimate goal? And our ultimate goal is to deliver organs.
Right, amazing, fascinating. Talk a little bit about this zero carbon footprint. What do we do with these batteries? We had a fascinating conversation yesterday from the president and CEO of the Joint Commission who does safety and quality checks at our organizations. And part of his conversation was how much greenhouse gases our facilities emit. What are your thoughts around that?
No, that's a great question. So the transition from being an R&D company, product development company, into being a manufacturing company required us to think a little bit differently about whether collaboration communication were king. Now, one of the things that we've incorporated into our new facility, so on October 2nd, we're opening the doors on what will be the largest net zero building east of the Mississippi, right here in South Burlington. And it is nearly a 200,000 square foot facility that all the energy it uses is generated on site. There's 260 geothermal wells, solar all over the roof, doesn't have a single gas line coming into it, and we're producing airplanes in it. That, of course, don't use any gas, which is kind of cool, right? But one of the things contained in that is that people want to work in a place that they like to come to work, that they're proud of. The LED lights, they change color through the day. There's a skylight that almost looks like a mall. It's kind of weird. Right down the center, so you have natural light. There's glass doors on the hangar doors. These are expensive, right? And every engineer can see the shop floor, and every shop floor people can see the engineers. There's one eatery. We don't divide the business up into blue collar and white collar. One entrance. And so the thinking all of a sudden became, we want to make a place that people love to come to work. And I was at the White House and I said it, and it became a sticker and a meme, make manufacturing sexy again. Let's not make it dark, dangerous, and dingy, but let's make it interesting and fun. And we have zero recruiting problems. We have 16,000 resumes in our Lever account right now that we can't even make it through because people want to work in a place where we have healthcare. We took upon ourselves to actually put in a clinic, hire a physician's assistant and a nurse, a pharmacy on site, and the philosophy was simple. You have tractors, we have excavators, we spend a lot of time maintaining them so that we can do our work, right? We do that in the office, we do it with other machine tools, and then people are left to just go maintain themselves. So my thought was, geez, the most valuable asset, let's take good care of them and tell them we're going to take care of them. Right. And there's a bunch of other examples of that. So this new manufacturing facility, we made a massive investment. Here's the fascinating thing, and it's very applicable, I think, to hospitals. You guys do things that is this the biggest industry in the state? It's got to be pretty close. It is. Yeah, you do things at pretty damn big scales. So at first there was this stigma that, wow, man, a 20-year return of investment on renewable projects and all this kind of stuff. 3.5 years is the return of investment on our geothermal project. 3.5 years. When you do things at scale and put 260 wells in, a massive heat exchanger, and 3 air handlers, I mean, you'd still put the same number of air handlers, control systems, heat exchangers in one geothermal well, yet we turned it into a factory and right through the ground. It was really neat to see that you could close the financial argument while doing something good for the environment and people.
Right. Any questions in the audience?
All right, thank you. Hi, Kyle. So first off, I applaud. You're very inspirational. I have a 14-year-old who's already decided that he wants to design planes with you, and a 16-year-old who just wants to fly them. So kudos to you. But I think one thing that I've seen here in the Northeast Kingdom, your engagement, obviously you're exploring the Caledonia County Airport, which we're really excited about. But I think it's something I've picked up from you is your commitment to community and supporting the entire community. And maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you know, Vermont, in my opinion, is a pretty special place. And we took a lot of flack early on, like as people were writing bigger and bigger checks into the company, they were saying, look, I'll write more if you come to Silicon Valley or you come out to Boston. Let's get to a place where you can get talent, get access to good advice. And I was like, you guys are bent. What you're missing is that here we actually not only have really good talent, but it's pretty easy to bring talent here when you expose things like the community and the culture of the state and the towns in the state and the company itself, of course. But it's a two-way street, right? You don't get to just suck the talent out without giving back and making sure that the state, the town, both hears you say that that's important, but also you contribute to it. And there's a lot of examples in South Burlington and St. Albans and Rutland where we've focused back on the community as a business, but it's not done, and we couldn't go to our investors and our board and say we're doing this just out of the goodness of our hearts. It's a two-way street. The community takes good care of us, and they have, and we take hopefully good care of the community. The other part of it is that, and this is like a really neat phenomenon that we've seen recently, is our competitors did launch in Silicon Valley. In fact, 4 of them launched there in Silicon Valley. Every single one of them is now splitting their company between Ohio, Georgia, Silicon Valley, Texas, because their manufacturing couldn't be done in Silicon Valley, right? So now they're just driving a wedge, not only between their business with the manufacturing and the engineering, but now the engineering and the product development, all that kind of stuff, they're going to drive a wedge between those individuals and their families because they're going to be commuting back and forth across the country to manufacturing. So one of the things in evaluating all these different sites, we said we're going to do it here in Vermont because I think people will find value in working at a place where they're not asked to leave for their manufacturing oversight or engineering input to that. And so that's another like just being aware of the community, but also the extension of the 600 people we have working. There's, I think we had a company party at my house recently. There was like 2,000 people there. And that was all their families, right? And their families, that's the community, right? And their friends. And so just thinking holistically about how our relationship with the community and not saying, oh, something good's about to happen, see ya, and we're going to go put a bunch of money over here. The other part is like within the state, like we started at the Burlington Airport. We've been starting to open these multiple, there's now 6 offices, there's 6 places that we do business around here in adjacent towns and other places in the state, with the Northeast Kingdom being one that we really would like to get to because that connection of the state and the mindset that we're in this together, working with one federal delegation, has been a strategic advantage on many other fronts as well. So our goal is actually to, although we're doing final assembly in Burlington, to start to pop up at multiple different state airports across the state to produce the parts that go into the airplanes. And it's a weird strategy, but like culturally, people freaking love it.
Right. I think I saw another hand. Patrick Rooney.
Good morning. Thanks for coming here. You spoke earlier about the electrification of aircraft and removing the fuel component as it relates to climate change. Our hospitals, much like I would imagine airplane manufacturing, are resource-intensive businesses. And so how is Beta thinking about the future of sourcing materials to manufacture those airplanes? Because when you think about an airplane, those materials are being sourced globally to produce 3, 4, 500, Airbus 350s. So how are you thinking about depleting that impact on the environment from a supply chain perspective?
Yeah, it's multidimensional. It's obviously the distance the stuff travels, how it's produced, who's making it. We have, unfortunately, the word policy in place for how we evaluate suppliers. We get really into their shorts from a quality perspective, and we use that as a platform to really understand their ESG positions. There are isolated cases. So number one, many company salespeople want to go back to their board and say, we would sell more if we did it better, or if we did it righter, if we did it greener. We give them that ammunition. So we're not bashful about that. And in return, in many cases, people are like, you know what, you're right. We're gonna change our shipping policy. We're gonna build 7 of those containers and we're gonna send them back and forth. Because the bodies left on the side of that primary supply chain are, in our case anyway, greater than the stuff. Like when you guys use a disposable, you take it out of a package that's probably 4 times the plastic of the actual disposable, right? We do the same thing with a 50-foot wing, right? We take it out of a package that has foam and all kinds of stuff, and the actual wing wasn't the big part of, and that's gonna go and have a 40-year life, right? And you're throwing this stuff out. So we impose that on our suppliers. We aren't Boeing, but we have a different form of leverage in that we kind of, excuse my French, jujitsu the fuck out of it. Like, so people come at us with this, like, whatever. We're like, yeah, but we're just going to move you over. Take your energy that you have, and we're just going to go like this and put it right back to your board and your management. And you're going to take this idea that you have as a salesperson has, that we want to do things greener, and you've been talking about it. You're here seeing that we're doing it. We're going to give you all the ammunition. You turn you right back around, and then it comes right back to us the way that we want it. And so that works in that supply chain thing. Now, there's other places where, like in batteries and magnets, specifically rare earth magnets and stuff, where it actually, the biggest impact is at the source of production, just because it's a gross process. We've said, okay, there's $180,000 of magnets in the airplane right now. That's a lot of dough. Can we absorb a 15% increase if we go over to a company in Europe that doesn't destroy the planet while they make that? It's painful, but we can do it. And in certain cases, we just have to change our supply chain strategy just to meet our goals. But our customers expect that. Neat little thing, TPG raised the largest climate fund ever, $9 billion 2 years ago, and now they've just topped that, and we were one of their first investments. And they're putting out their annual report this year, and we're the feature. And it's like, this is how you do it end to end. You don't just make a sustainable product. You build a sustainable facility, and you have a supply chain strategy that pulls in things that are sustainable. And sometimes it's painful, but if I go to Martine and I say, look, we're gonna be 2 months late, we switched our magnet supplier, if she says why, I have a very good answer. And she says, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Joe Wooden.
Kyle, thanks. It's so interesting to hear about you, the jobs you're creating, the commitment to Vermont. It's just amazing. I want to go back to sort of growing your own, which is really important, right? We have that problem in America, in Vermont, what you're doing. I'm gonna give you a compliment. You're as inspiring as Dean Kamen. That's a compliment. And he has done a lot to develop FIRST Robotics. So I was a volunteer, my background's engineering, but I was a volunteer with FIRST Robotics in Vermont. But do you use that as a source to kind of encourage kids? Because that's a pretty jacked up, interesting way to get kids in manufacturing. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's small world. So Dean Kamen is a close friend, a mentor. He gifted me my first helicopter after actually speaking at at DECA, and he has been an inspiration. But yes, FIRST Robotics is a phenomenal. John Abley, right here in Vermont, was the chairman of the board there, and he introduced the concept of cooperation within FIRST Robotics, where teams had to both compete with each other and work with and collaborate with each other to win to get to the next level, and they may be on the other side of the fence in the next round. Just a fascinating organization, some really creative thoughts, but yeah, the inspiration that we get by having a very large involvement with organizations like FIRST Robotics, encouraging our employees, as you may know this, to become mentors. And St. Johnsbury now has a team. CVU's had a team. First time last year, FRC Robot made it to the World Championships in Houston, so we went down there to watch them compete. First time a Vermont team made it. It was really kind of neat. And if you don't know what we're talking about, you should start to know what we're talking about. Science, technology, engineering, math students should be going through hands-on learning things like FIRST Robotics, in my opinion, where they're put into teams or they create a team, and then they go out and they compete with their engineering ingenuity in a very unique way. They're not just trying to win with their technical approach, they're winning with their social approach, their ability to collaborate with other teams, and solve all these problems to produce a product that actually works, as opposed to a problem set in the academic environment. But yeah, Dean is a hero. He's awesome. I hope to be like him someday, obviously. And FIRST Robotics, yeah, that's a great plug for FIRST Robotics. We sponsor teams at Beta. I think the hospital network should find ways to sponsor that science, technology, engineering, math part of our world.
Anyone else in the audience?
Hi, I have a question about employees and housing, and whether or not the housing shortage in Vermont has had any impact on your ability to hire or not.
It absolutely has had some impact. We've done what we could to mitigate that with a lot of partnerships locally. We ended up actually buying a bunch of townhouses in order to have a short-term stopgap, because it's not like the long-term find a house or build a house or whatever is the problem, and there's, as you know, developments going in and other such things. It's like that first 6 months or a year. So we have a whole bunch of houses that we rent as a company, and then we cycle employees through. And that's, the dynamics of that are challenging, by the way. You know, you go tell somebody they got to be out in 6 months, and they're like, but I've been focused on work, you made me do this. And all of a sudden, the conflation of work and personal gets really dangerous. So I'm not saying that's a great idea, but yes, it's a problem. It is, you know, and this is different in every world. We're a hands-on business, but not absolutely. So we allow people like a graceful transition into our business, and we're really flexible around that, recognizing people can't find housing, childcare, in some cases healthcare. So I don't have a secret weapon there. I recognize that we as an industry, or us as a business being a private company that has ultimate flexibility, if somebody called me today and said, hey, I've got 6 houses on College Street that need to go up, I'd say, okay, we'll execute it by the end of the day. Like, you guys can't do that in your budgets, right? And we have the flexibility to do that kind of stuff. But just being creative, and then on the secondary front, we've been really flexible with people who are going to be hands-on people in that transitional period. Sorry for the crappy answer.
Thank you.
I have a real practical question. So where are you now with Aaliyah, and like, how did you know when it was safe to get in that plane? Like, I don't like to fly, and you kind of like to fly. Like, when did you know it was going to work?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I'll answer where we are with Aaliyah now. We built like a whole bunch of unmanned small aircraft and a couple versions of full-scale aircraft and flew them a lot. And then we built 2 pre-production prototypes that now have basically gone through so many iterations, like grandfather's axe. They don't even actually resemble the first airplanes. But we did that for economy. That informed what we're going to call a production design. When we got to the point that we knew that this was going to appease Mother Nature and the physics were going to close, that the regulators were going to agree with it, and then over the last 2 years that customers were lined up. We have a backlog of about 600 aircraft right now. We pulled the trigger on building our facility here. We applied for our type certifications with the FAA, and all of the subsequent application submissions, much like the FDA, it is not a one and done type thing. It is a process. It is a 5-year process to get a type certification for an airplane. So now, what's really interesting, we open up our facility on October 2nd, and our first production aircraft, like I was in there yesterday, and we are storing, not stocking, a bunch of parts that are coming up, and it's like this bow wave of stuff ready to hit the production line. Can't go in there until we have a certificate of occupancy, and we're cleared by the fire marshal, of course, to let that production line rip. But that aircraft facility will end up making 300 aircraft a year, which is an amazing number of aircraft if you try. It's not the 450,000 Teslas, but that's a lot of aircraft. So where are we? We're right on the edge of producing our first what we call conforming aircraft, which means that the FAA has been involved from the definition of the product all the way through the supply chain, all the way through all the inspections, all the way through the engineering and analytics and artifacts, to the point that it comes on the production line. And as it's created, we go and flight test that aircraft to show that we've closed the entire loop, that the product does what we said it's going to do. And we still have about probably 2 years before we have a type certification. But what's interesting in the interim is we got military flight releases and we just got regulatory approval overseas, which is a different bar than the FAA. So some of those pre-certified aircraft are actually going to be going overseas. So we're shipping a bunch of aircraft over the next few years all over the world.
Yeah, so who are your customers and what are they using the aircrafts for?
So one of our best customers is actually Health and Human Services. So they've laid down the framework of a charging network that we put in that connects the entire southeast of the United States together, centered around Mississippi where the trials are going on. So that's a big customer for us, moving telemedicine equipment, blood products, probably not initially kind of critical patient stuff, but eventually that'll happen. But this year and next year, we're putting in all the charging nodes to do that.
So is it sort of like Tesla? You got to plan to stop and recharge and have lunch while you recharge? How long does it take?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Good question. No, the actual missions don't include recharging. However, repositioning the aircraft, getting them there, and in Mississippi, they have 2 primary hospitals, 11 satellite hospitals, to get to all these different places. It's a model we'd love to do in Vermont. The dynamics of the federal government are a little funky, where Mississippi gets a lot of attention with healthcare monies, as you guys probably know. The second part of your question, the other big customers, the Air Force, the Army, and the Marines. And these are for logistics, so medical logistics, food logistics, ship to shore, shore to shore type stuff.
Are those manned aircraft?
They are initially manned aircraft, yes. The biggest commercial customers and the biggest orders have come out of Air New Zealand. They have a great little island, and all the ranges are like right within the range of our aircraft, under a couple hundred nautical miles. And UPS. So UPS has ordered 150 of these aircraft. And right now, when you guys ship something via a commercial carrier or a express cargo like UPS or FedEx, goes on a truck, it goes over to Williston, gets sorted, gets put to the airport. The airport goes to Manchester, Manchester to Philly, Philly to Louisville, Louisville out to, I don't know, where do you send your blood product to? Let's say Buffalo. It goes up to Buffalo, goes from the airport over to the distribution center out to the hospital. It's goes 1,500 miles when Buffalo's 140 nautical miles away, right? So the future UPS, it'll come to the distribution center, and an ALIA will take off from the distribution center with, say, 1,500 pounds of stuff, and all of it's going to Buffalo, because the 65,000 pounds of stuff that made it down to Manchester was all going to different places, but a portion of that is going regionally, direct city to city. There are 800 city pairs that have enough package volume to justify this right now. So it would go from Williston to Buffalo. That's it. And so it's a massive efficiency gain for them.
What kind of packages? How big are they? What's the weight limit?
Yeah. So the aircraft has a 50-foot wingspan. The inside of the aircraft is about as long as a stage, 14 feet long, and as wide as a pallet. So you can put 4 shipping pallets in there. The 40 by 42 shipping pallets, 51 inches high. So that's like the cargo volume of the aircraft.
Wow. Anyone else in the audience have some thoughts or additional questions?
Yes, sir.
Can you fit a patient in there to transport them to UVM?
The answer is yes. And I should have brought some fancy pictures showing those layouts, because we did those a long time ago. It's not our entry point, just because there's a lot of equipment, safety equipment and other such things that goes with a patient, but ultimately, yeah, we'll get there. Right. Initially, it'll be used for CASEVAC in the military, which is a great stepping stone to get to some of this medical patient transport.
So in one of these photos, it looks like you have parachutes on your lap. And how much longer will you be needing to keep a parachute on your lap?
It's an interesting question. This is actually a current debate, and I'll tell you why. Because and this is not public information yet, but we're launching on October 10th to deploy our aircraft first to a Air Force base in Florida. And along the way, several generals are coming to fly the aircraft and other such things. And at some point, we have enough confidence, thousands of test points later, that we don't need a parachute, right? In our flight test program right now, because in those videos that you see, we're exploring the edges of the aircraft. A normal flight, taking off and landing, 100% you don't need a parachute. But when we go up and we explore the spin characteristics of the airplanes, the low speed, the accelerated stalls.
Oh, sounds fun.
And other land. It is a blast. It is a blast. And by the way, I want to answer your first question. Like, when did I know it was safe enough to get in the airplane? Probably well before it was. But we don't use a parachute on low altitude flights like when we do hovering flights. It's not going to help you any, right? But the safety reviews that we go through, so we went through some maturity steps. Internally, we had to get what they call an experimental airworthiness certificate with the FAA, where they just look at the airplane build quality. They don't look at the physics or anything. And then you start an incremental build-up test approach where you know where your safe zone is. So every point that you go to, so if you're at 68 knots, at some particular angle of attack, and you've already cleared 55 knots, you know if something goes wrong, I'm going to slow down. And sometimes it's speed up. Sometimes it's reduce the angle of attack. Sometimes it's increase the angle of attack. So we have all these different design of experiments that allow us a safe out. And some of them you don't have an easy way out. Accelerated stall testing that goes into spins, potentially. You don't get to say, oh, never mind, I'm going to undo that and go back to where I was before. You're committed. And in that case, we absolutely wear parachutes, probably in the next 2 months as we do these demo flights. Now that we've graduated from this research and development ticket to a market survey ticket, there's no law that says we have to be wearing this extra safety equipment.
So tons of innovation, lots of creativity. Sounds like you have a pretty big checkbook. We try to do a lot in healthcare, and we have a lot of restrictions. So restrictions mostly around resources. We have challenges around workforce. What are some of the things that you can impart on us as we think about being more creative, doing things differently, doing more with less? Some thoughts there.
Yeah.
I think often where our progress and forward motion gets stalled because of resource constraint. How do you manage that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they've trusted me with $1 billion. It's crazy to me too. It's like these investors, they really want to believe that there's this. But here's the interesting thing. There was a consultant who writes generally for the industry and consults with a lot of the big banks about the industry, and he created an index where he showed the progress per dollar spent and tracked about the 60 people who have gotten funded in this industry. And we were like the anomaly. The point at which we first flighted, the point at which we got airworthiness certificates, we opened a manufacturing facility, we got military airworthiness certificates, we flew with the FAA, all these milestones that everybody's trying to get to, we did it in less time and less dollars than everybody else in the industry by like a factor of 2, which is crazy. And that's putting us in a phenomenal position to go get more money, ironically, right? But the way that I've found works really well in our business is you openly talk about that and make that a sense of pride. We can do more than with less. We are efficient because we think efficiently. Act like an entrepreneur. And that really confuses a lot of people. They're like, well, what do you mean? I mean, step into a room, be okay with making a decision, be thoughtful about the way you're spending money as if it's your own. And this is one of our values, right? We have a small book of 10 values. It's acting like an entrepreneur. And over and over again, you hear people say and question their colleagues, hey, it's not quite the place we should be spending our dough or our time, right? Because time's expensive. And you hear these debates going on, and it leads to more efficiency.
The second trick, and I don't know that you could legally do this in a hospital, but we don't have an approval process for capital expenditures up to, we don't go spending $15 million at a time. But if somebody wants to buy a $50,000 oscilloscope.
You don't have a certificate of need? What? No. What?
Yeah, we submit those. Yeah. No, the philosophy that I entered this business with, which was always frustrating to me because I was a manager of all these engineers. We had 40 people at my prior company that would come to me and say, hey, can you approve that I buy this $150,000 spectrum analyzer? I'm like, do you need it? They're like, yeah, of course I need it. Is there any alternatives? And you ask them all these dumb questions, and then you're like, by the power vested in me, you may buy the, and it was like, he still knows way more about this than me, but now he looks and says, hey, Kyle said I could buy it. It was approved. And all of a sudden he's lost all accountability on whether or not that decision was the right thing or the wrong thing. So what I did is I said, you know what? You don't ask me that question. If you need information, I'm happy to give you information. Yes, that program's gonna be alive in a year. Yes, you're gonna get 2 more resources to work on it. Yes, you're whatever. You still make the decision. And with the information you have at the time, you make that decision, you own that decision, and then go make it. And what I've found is that a lot of times people then look and they're like, I really don't need a $6,000 bench. Maybe I need something else. And all of a sudden people start thinking like they're building it in their own garage. Whatever. That's thinking like an entrepreneur. You're spending your own money because you're accountable to what came out of it. And I understand people will say, that doesn't scale. Well, it scaled from 6 people to 50 people to 100 people to 500 people. And it turns out by the metrics that outside third parties have looked at, we've done more with less money. And I think that's a big part of it. It's that accountability.
Fascinating. So 2017 till now, your company has grown a ton. Production's coming down the pike. What, as you look back on these 4 or 5 years, what would you have maybe done differently? It sounds like you're pretty efficient, effective, but there's got to be some learning moments that you've had. And what are those?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So I would say that I would have actually invested more in the people of the business. As a startup business, you don't know if you're going to be around next year or the year after or whatever. And there's a lot of people who I look at and I should have sent them to that program, that class, invested in their education a little more. And that's informed and changed our policies on people's education. It's really expensive to train a test pilot, like millions of dollars to train a test pilot. So
gotta be special people too.
They gotta come in with a little bit of skill to start with. So now when somebody comes in and says, I want to go to this class, the answer is yes. What's the class? And we've applied that capital expenditure thing to people's training. And we make people think, we allow people to think about themselves as an asset of the business. And that makes them a little more sticky to the business. I just had a person come to me and say, hey, Kyle, I'm not going to go to the training I was going to go to. And I said, why aren't you going? And she said, she goes, because I think I'm going to leave the company in about 6 months. And it wouldn't be fair to the company if I went to that and then left. And I said, you can still go to the training because you came to me and you said that and you're thinking like that. Because my guess is you're going to go to the airlines, because by the way, the airlines are throwing down like $300,000 like starting pay for qualified captains. And then you're going to come back. And I'm going to be happy that you were trained on that particular, in this case, it was a jet type rating. And she's like, okay, well, let me think about that. But by pushing that back, so I would have extended earlier the idea of self-accountability to people's training. And I think that we would find that those people that are within the business would just have a higher level of confidence, aptitude, stickiness to the business. And of course that training stuff just like bleeds over to other people. We had a team that went out to do composites training in the Southwest. They came back, and screw the 2 weeks they spent out there. They came back with all this material, and then they put on classes in the company and just started spreading this stuff. So I would have invested more in training.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're just at the hour here. Super happy to have you here. Fascinating. Any closing remarks or something you wish somebody asked or you wish I asked? You know, this is just fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I have no closing remarks that are insightful. I just want to say thank you for having me here, and thanks for everything you all do to the state. I mean, it's you guys provide a service which obviously I think is incredibly important, taking care of people, and it's obviously meaningful to the state, and it's generally underappreciated. You know, the news and others aren't celebrating every time there's a contract won or what'd you call it, a permission slip?
Certificate of need.
Certificate of need is awarded, right? But it hits the
we're gonna call them permission slips from now on.
But it hits the news every time we raise a little bit of money or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you guys stay up all night writing proposals, working this stuff, and I want you to know it's appreciated by certainly me and our team, and I think that the state appreciates it, especially in a time of need. And you guys have had a pretty challenging last couple of years, and have steadfast rode through it. And you know, there's a reason that Vermont's, I believe this to be the case, the healthiest state in the nation, and it's, I think, a big part because of y'all.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.